When we are in that place, when we are open-hearted and the love is flowing, we are tapped into something that is so much greater than our human 3D experience. And it really is like the unlock to mastering life, having an exquisite life. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Unstoppable Woman podcast. I'm Amira Alvarez. I'm the founder and CEO of the Unstoppable Woman, where we help really successful women have even more exquisite lives than they already have right now. And we're talking on this podcast about different definitions of success and how we can look at success and ambition and drive from multiple angles. And to do so, we bring on various guests. And today I have a fabulous woman who I've had the pleasure of having a rollicking good time conversation with just a short while ago. And I'm thrilled to have her on the podcast. Her name is Natalie Norfus, and she's the founder of the Norfus firm. And she brings nearly 2 decades of global leadership in crafting bespoke HR and DEI solutions. And I'm going to pause there and let Natalie introduce her in her own words instead of just reading bio speak, which is all very, very important. But she has a very interesting story. So Natalie, welcome to the show. And please tell our listenership a little bit about your current business, and then we'll get into your pathway to this.
And I appreciate you allowing me to have the voice here. In short, we solve people problems. I love to say it because that's what we're dealing with, right? We're in the workplaces in various capacities, ranging from diversity, equity, inclusion, human resources, org design. And in the end, it's always involving, there's some issue in how people are either interacting or need to interact in the workplace that we get to sort of jump in on and advise our clients. We're data driven. We're nerds around the data because we find that it helps businesses make decisions in the way they always do with the numbers. But because we're very people-centered, we also, again, we bring that humanity piece to it. So we add the life to the numbers that we share with our clients about what's going on in their organization.
I love that. Okay, so now tell us about your path. Like, you have a very successful business right now. You love what you do. You've built this great thing that has both the people and the numbers. But how'd you get here? That's always an interesting story, right?
You know, I love this question because I think, it's going to sound a little cheesy because people are like, oh, it's in the beginning. But the reality is that for what I do and for my life, it really is sort of from the beginning. I come from a multi-ethnic, multi-religious background. So I grew up, my upbringing was pretty interesting. And I actually was just talking to someone about this today, because I was really only raised and exposed to the Black side of my family. That leads a lot on how I identify, but I'm also Jewish and my mom was white and her family came over during the Holocaust. So that's part of me too. And I talk about that a lot as well. But that upbringing of seeing things from different perspectives and understanding that there are all these different perspectives, it was always fascinating to me to dig in, to understand different cultures and governments and the like. So I followed that path through college, where I did international studies. I thought I was going to be a diplomat. I didn't even know what it takes to be a diplomat. So that didn't work out. Then I went to law school and I picked George Washington because at the time it was the only school that had an immigration clinic. I was really interested in understanding and working in an immigration clinic. And then when I graduated from law school, I was a labor and employment lawyer and practiced in 3 states for about 15 years. And part of that time I was in-house at big, well-known fast food brands where I did global employment law, global immigration, and I was the chief diversity officer. So for 20 years, I've been digging into people issues, like the nuance of it. And so getting to this place is a little bit unique in that I had a business role and a legal role at the same time when I was in-house. So it helped reframe how I looked at people issues and how you talk about them. And then this business was not anything that was ever like in my plan. Like I never thought I would be an entrepreneur, but I think I shared with you before, I can't imagine doing anything else, right? Like, it's like, this was all of the sort of things that happened along the way. The dark years of my career brought me to this point.
Okay, well, I have to go there. I was going to ask you why you went from corporate to running your own business, and then you just threw me that underhanded pitch there, like the dark years. Tell me about the dark years. What made them dark?
I think there's a thing that happens when you're a first gen anything where you really don't know what you don't know. So I was a first gen law student. My parents, while went to college, couldn't help me with this because neither went to law school. Like there was nobody that I knew or trusted that could help me understand what I was walking into. What I always tell folks who think about law school is talk to a bunch of lawyers that do different things. That would have been tremendously helpful had I done that, ahead of time. Don't regret it, but I just didn't know what I was getting myself into. And in law school, I always felt like a fish out of water. It was like, I think the thing that was like the most validating, although sobering, was I was taking a mediation course in law school, my third year of law school. And as part of the course, the professor had us take the Myers-Briggs assessment because to help figure out what kind of mediator or what kind of arbiter would you be based on personality type. And when she was explaining mine, is like, you're very creative. You're probably asking yourself why you're in law school. And I was like, oh, because this doesn't really fit who I actually am, right? You find your way to overcome those things and did well in law school. I got great jobs, but I kind of came out of law school like, I don't know that I really want to do this, and I was raised in a generation where you pick something. So at that time, I didn't even contemplate at 24 years old that maybe I should do something else, right? It's like, okay, I went to school, I did all these things, and now I have to be a lawyer, right? And I just didn't enjoy a lot of it. I'm very practical. So litigation to me felt very impractical and monotonous. I like stuff that changes and moves and how businesses are evolving and all those things. But I'm so grateful for the experience because again, without it, I wouldn't have the lens I have now of seeing how a problem can start with, misunderstanding in the workplace and hit the court and what happens in the court, right? So I'm grateful for it, but it just wasn't something that spoke to my heart. When I was in-house, I liked a lot of the work, but I was working in an organization that was really resistant to DEI. And the way I described those areas, and when I
can you pause there for a second?
Sure.
What does resistant to DEI look like? What is that? I mean, I think that's we could gloss over that, but I'd love to know, what are the decisions, what are the conversations or the lack of conversations that are happening behind the scenes that represent that?
Amazing question. So when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a topic that is very much maligned these days in the media, what we're really looking at are good business practices. So when you look at diversity, means being composed of differing elements. I have not met one employer who says they want mediocre talent. Every employer that I meet says they want the top talent. Well, talent doesn't discriminate, which means anyone from any background with any combination of demographics can be talented, which means you have to think about how to look for people in different places to get the best talent possible. If you're always going to the same place to find talent, you're going to get homogeneity, whether it be race, gender, schooling, and you're going to not get sort of that diversity of thought and perspective. That's what we mean when we mean diversity, as an example. Equity looks at fairness. And are we thinking about the sort of obstacles that folks have had or the barriers to access that certain groups may have had over others and how to remove it? It's not taking away from anyone. It's just making sure that everyone has a fair chance to succeed in the workplace. And then finally, when you're looking at inclusion, that really, to me, gets at, the word itself is sort of self-explanatory, but what it really gets at is, are you creating a work environment where people want to stay? We know that it costs a lot of money to hire and fire, right? Some estimations are that it's 6 to 9 months of the salary you're replacing, right? So if you're thinking about someone who makes, $100,000 and it's costing you $60,000 to $90,000 to replace them, and you didn't want them to leave, you want to make sure that you are creating a workplace where people want to stay, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about those terms. We're not talking about discrimination. We're not talking about quotas. We're not talking about affirmative action. We're talking about strong business practices to get the top talent who will innovate and stay. So because people, typically what happens when you feel the resistance is people don't understand what DEI is, and they look at it, particularly if they're in the position of power, right? If they are the dominant gender in the workplace, or they're the dominant race, or the dominant national origin, the feeling is that they feel threatened, like you want to take something from them. And there becomes a lot of these conversations. Well, I earned this. Great. Nobody said you didn't, right? Like there's a lot of defensiveness.
I'm curious about where that comes from, like from a psychological, emotional perspective. We're all human beings. So it's not like if we take this outside of the DEI framework or lens that we're looking at, we've all had the experience of feeling defensive or like trying to justify or whatnot. Where do you think that comes from, particularly in the DEI framework?
Well, I think in your context of making it broader is that people don't want to be wrong,
Yeah.
right? So if you're saying, hey, this is what your employees are saying, this is how they're feeling, and that does not comport with what a leader thought, then, and they're not sort of willing to sort of take that different perspective in, they don't want to be wrong. Well, no, it's not that way. It's this way. And what we're always saying, it's not good, bad, right, wrong. It's just what is. It is what this is just what it is, right? This is how they feel. It doesn't make you a bad person or a bad leader. It's just, these are the facts. And I think it's hard to get people to that point if they have a very set view of what their organization is like, which we see really regularly, right? Like a CEO or a CFO, and they're like, oh, it's like this. And it's like, you talk to the employees, they're like, do you guys even work at the same company? Because like the views are that. So the resistance comes from that. The resistance comes from people thinking we're talking about quotas and that they need to go hire 7 women and 5 Black people and 4 Hispanic. No, that's not. And so then there's that back and forth. And the reason why people get stuck there is A, what you hear in the media, and B, when we're saying, hey, let's do a pay equity analysis, let's do a promotion equity analysis. That starts to bring, if there's anything that's demonstrating things may not be as equitable as you think they are, that it's like, oh, so you just say we should just give women more money. It's like, no, like we're saying, like, let's look at the jobs and say if there's this disparity, is there a reason for it that's fair, right? Like, so it's just kind of getting above the headlines is basically, or getting deeper than the headlines is what we're always trying to get at.
Yeah, I have so many questions on this. So this is great. I love it. You've mentioned the media a number of times, okay? Yeah. And I have one small little experience that I'll share with you in a bit, but I'm curious what you're referring to specifically in the media, because I'll refer to what I know in a moment, but I'm curious what you're referring to.
So there's, I think, 2 strong narratives that one has not a direct correlation to DEI and one does. So, but they're getting blended together. So we had the affirmative action opinion that came out last year. The Supreme Court basically overruled the ability of colleges and universities to use race-conscious admission standards, right? So that means that people have to get creative about sharing who they are as people, and the universities can't specifically consider, oh, you're a woman from an underrepresented group, and so we're going to give that some level of preference. So I was interviewed a significant bit about that ruling and what would that mean for DEI. I think even in the framing of some of the questions I got were blending topics, right? Because number one, affirmative action and DEI are not the same thing. Affirmative action is more legal, compliance based on trying to correct past discrimination. And there was never any sort of goal that was set. Like, we discriminated so many years and now we have to get to this level. Like, that was never, it was just amorphous. And we're talking about affirmative action that applies in colleges and universities, which of course those are employers too, but for the vast majority of the clients that we have, like, it's irrelevant, right? Like, because most employers are not using any kind of affirmative action framework when they're hiring. So most private employers. So that framing was off, right? To assume that DEI and private companies or nonprofits are going to be impacted is like, it's not, you're talking about 2 different things, but people now are blending it. So everything starts to merge together. And then we had the Anti-Woke Act in Florida, where I live, that was sort of, getting at underlying concepts in DEI. And I think the issue in Texas has, and there's other states that have these kinds of laws, is that the media never talks about the fact, like, they always bury the fact that a lot of these laws are unlawful on the federal level. So the Stop Woke Act violated the US Constitution. And when all of these headlines were out, like, and still out, saying Stop Woke and the Stop Woke Act, nobody is also talking about, oh, but by the way, it's not even being enforced. It's not even on the books technically because it's been enjoined by a federal court. And now an appellate court has affirmed that, right? So then you're not having the real conversation.
What's the real conversation that actually needs to be had?
One, reminding folks what DEI is,
Mm-hmm.
like to begin with. And two, because I think it's when you anchor people to what you're trying, what the goal is, what is success like if we do DEI well, then it's anybody's decision on what it looks like. But I think, as an industry, we need some sort of like clearly defined standards so that people aren't making 50 million different definitions of DEI. So I think that's first and foremost. And second, I don't know, maybe I'm dating myself, but I just feel sort of some of the investigative journalism, like this doesn't go as deep as it used to go. And it's like, understand the difference in these concepts. Like if you're the one framing the title and you're framing this narrative, spend a little bit more time to like really get to the bottom of what these things mean.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's clickbait, but
yeah, exactly.
When I asked what's the real conversation that needs to be had, I thought you were going to answer with something else, which was around bringing the humanity back, which was one of the things that we were that's big for you. So,
well, you can't bring the humanity back if we don't even know what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I do want to get to the exquisite life. What does success look like to you? Like, I'm going to circle back to all of those things, but I find, you have a wealth of information on this, and this is a topic that I'm quite curious about. Mm-hmm. So I had a conversation recently with someone who is a well-evolved human, kind, generous person, and was talking about the issues with Boeing and how people were saying that it was because they hired or promoted or I don't know. It was like the affirmative action hack at Boeing. And I got on a little tirade about it, that a company like Boeing couldn't possibly make business decisions by saying we're going to put anyone in a position. They're going to put highly qualified people in a position. It just doesn't make sense to do it any other way. So like just from a gut, like I know nothing about the situation. I haven't been following it in the news or anything. I'm like hyperbole on social media. So,
well, and it is, right? Because that's come up a couple times, not just with Boeing, but other places where something's gone wrong. I think it was like there was a Black woman CEO. It was either Walgreens or CVS, right? And then it was like all these think pieces, like, well, if they weren't so concerned with diversity, the company would have done better. And really what it does is like that whole hit dogs holler, right? Like, okay, your racism is showing or your misogyny is showing, right? Like, how could you possibly know all the ins and outs of what happened on the inside and why things worked or didn't work, right? Like white male CEOs fail every day. Right? Like no one says, oh, well, see, that's what happens when you hire a white guy. The whole thing shuts down. And people don't even recognize the bias that they're exhibiting when they speak, right? Like if I'm saying it to you, I'm guessing it resonates on level like, yeah, that's crazy. Like because you work with really successful women. Like the CEO is not the only person who works at a company. Like, and in fact, they're not typically the ones that are doing the heavy lift on accomplishing an organization's mission, vision, KPIs, revenue targets. There's a whole team of people. So I think, again, if you're going back to people don't get what DEI is, they feel threatened by the idea that a Black woman was the CEO of some huge publicly held company, or a Black woman was the dean of a prestigious, university. And so it's just this thing where it's like, there's still this resistance to even accepting that like racism, misogyny, all these things exist. Because again, people don't want to feel like they were wrong.
Why do you think? Because there's overt racism and there's overt misogyny, and then there is a lack of thoughtfulness around it. Like the conversation that I was engaged in was someone who read something on social media and didn't think twice about it. Like it seemed so easy for this person to believe that. And that to me is the more challenging aspect of the conversation, that was not someone who would be overtly racist or a misogynist, but so easily believed this story. And And it was a little shocking to me.
Well, I think if you put this in a bigger perspective, I would say the average person in this country is overstimulated every day. There are so many stimuli, right? You could go on social media and see anything from like a fight at a pool to a luxury vacation in Bali in a matter of seconds, interspersed by the things that always get me caught up, which is the freaking Facebook marketing or Instagram. I'm always buying clothes in the middle of the night. I'm like, oh, that looks interesting, right? It's all day. And then that same thing happens in work. And so people are looking for mental shortcuts. And the thing that we talk about a lot is you've got to pause. We're talking to CEOs of bigger companies. We're like, your people are burnt. Is there some kind of priority you can take off the plate? Can we pivot? Because it's like, we're not as human beings. I've talked to a few psychologists about that. Our brains are not equipped for the amount of information we're taking in. Yeah. So I think it decreases greatly your critical thinking skills, because just as an example, TikTok to me is an incredible social media outlet to learn about a lot of different types of trends. Now, if I look at my 16-year-old, he's typically going to go on, I watch him. His first place to research information is to go to TikTok. And where I have to say is, great, now come off the app and go and do some additional research, right? So I got really fascinated. There was a whole trend on Native and indigenous people around the world. So it was like, okay, you watch these beautiful videos from like New Zealand and parts of Mexico where you're seeing indigenous people. And then I get off and I go and I read and look up more to learn from other sources that might be a little bit more reputable to get answers. But it's like we see a 20-second video and that becomes, oh, yeah.
The reality.
Exactly. And
okay,
it's sad. So it's like we don't have enough space to play and to think and to explore. So then everything becomes these shortcuts.
Yeah. So it's really about expanding our knowledge base and our awareness. I'm going to shift our conversation away from DEI for a moment and talk more personally about you and your journey in business. So can you share a moment when you realized that achieving success wasn't what you had conceived of initially?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was when I knew where I was doing for my first job, like out of law school. I actually sat in my law school professor's office and I was like, I feel like I'm selling out. I'm going to work for this big, huge global firm, and it's not immigration. It's not like, for the people. And so that it was hard to accept that even though my first job, I was making an amount of money that it took my dad like 20 years to get to, right? Like that from a family standpoint, it is, a form of success, that it didn't like resonate with, how I saw myself or, where I wanted to make an impact. So it was then. And I think I was chasing that until I decided to make the move to this business. And my dad, I'm very close to my dad, and like any job I would have, so you happy here, Nat? No, Dad, I don't really like this either. And so then he asked me about my business. Are you happy? I'm so happy, Dad. Oh my gosh, Nat, I am so happy, because it's like, I just want nothing more than you to be happy. And he was obviously so proud of everything I was doing, but so sad that I wasn't happy,
Yeah. And how many years did it take you to go from first job to getting to the business that you love?
15 years.
So what do you think kept you trapped for that long?
The paychecks.
So golden handcuffs. Okay.
Well, yeah. And I think this goes to like when you're from certain, like, again, I'm from groups, grew up and my parents weren't great with money, right? Like no one was talking to me about money. So and it's no slight to them. I think my parents did the best they could with what they knew. But going into college and in getting credit cards and not fully understanding what that means, or taking out loans that maybe you didn't need the loans because you like all those financial decisions, and then going to the third most expensive law school in the country at that time. You're coming out. My parents were not wealthy at all. There was no money they were going to give me. I didn't have anywhere else to like draw upon for money. So I had to take the best job I could get, is how I felt. Right now, of course, technically you have choice. Right. I could have said, I don't care if I pay my loans back. I'm going to go, travel the world or do whatever thing. That was also a choice. So I don't want to make it seem like I was a victim. Not at all. I just didn't feel like that was a viable choice for me. Right. So the viable choice I took was the paycheck.
Yeah. And so how did you end up feeling comfortable enough to make the transition?
So when I was in house, I asked to move into the business because I didn't feel like I was growing in my role. And so in the business role, like I got all this really cool experience. I mean, starting even in the legal role, I did the Six Sigma training. So I got up to my green belt. And in the business, I got to learn a lot about P&Ls and, buying and selling restaurants and what's profitable and what's not, which I think rounded out my legal and DEI experience. But it helped me it reflected to me that I really like solving people problems. Like I really enjoy the people interaction. So it was like that was a helpful reflection of I still want to be involved in like people projects and how people look at their organization and their culture. And so for me, it was like, okay, and I wasn't so happy where I was, right? It wasn't even just the
But
content.
but like financially, you had these golden handcuffs, you were making really good money, you were a high level executive,
Mhm.
and then you're like, okay, I'm going to start this business. Right? Like,
Well, so it wasn't even that straightforward, actually, because I was talking to a friend of mine about like, I want to move on. I want to give myself 90 days to like think about, like, again, the space I talk about, like, well, what do I really want? Right.
mhm,
Because I was already in the unicorn role at one point where you have a chief diversity officer and a lawyer. Those jobs don't exist like that. So I would have had to pick one or the other. And
mhm.
did I want to do that? And when I was talking to her, she's a business owner. She's like, you should just start a business. And I'm like, what? And she's like, let me tell you, which you're always grateful for women or anybody who are willing to tell you how much money they make. So you have some idea of when they say do something. So she started running down, she still practices law. So she started running down like how much she was making from certain settlements, like in attorney's fees. And she's like, I like, and I'm like, interesting, And so then I had gone to yoga with one of my old bosses at a law firm I worked at. And I was like, I'm thinking maybe I would start doing investigations. I really enjoy investigations. She's like, oh my God, you would be so great at that. A week later, she calls me, oh, one of my partners needs an investigation. I'm going to have him call you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then one of my mentors needed help with some big projects. And I'm like, I guess I'm starting a business,
So you put it out there in the universe and you got matched with some great opportunities. I love that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I want to follow up on a couple things. I want to circle back to money in a little bit, but you said spaciousness is really important to you. So let's
Mhm.
talk about that because I think that's one of the keys to having an exquisite life. This nuanced, like having enough time and space to do what we want and to do the deep thought thinking and to rejuvenate and to like pour into ourselves and not so little structure that you don't get things done or move the ball down the field, so to speak. So how have you approached spaciousness, creating
Mm.
spaciousness in your life?
I think it's a practice. And every year I feel like we get better at it because you recognize the signs of feel like you're starting to feel trapped or constricted much sooner. So a few things that I do and I do with my team is some type of group time off. So this year, they kind of vetoed me. It used to be like all of our time off was all at the same time. We would close the firm and they're like, we want to use the time when we want to. Okay, cool. But there's still a value in my mind to everyone being off at the same time. And so like this year we did an impromptu spring break. We had some really tough projects and people were tired. And I was just like, okay, we're just going to take this week off, but together, because no one's going to have to feel guilty about you letting someone down. We're all not working. And I was very like, if you even think you have to work, come through me, right? Because I
Yeah.
think everything everybody's working on can wait a week, right? So that's one example is the group time off, not just, of course, I take my own time off and everybody takes their own time off, but as a team so that people have that time to like decompress on their own in the way they need to. We are really vigilant about strategic planning and KPI setting because the reality is there is a finite amount of energy that we have. And if what I actually have been telling my team a lot this year is if I am asking you to do something that's so far outside of our big bets or our KPIs, you please tell me, right? Because
Yeah.
our energy needs to be moving us toward our goals. There's a million trillion things we could focus on. We're nerds, we're curious, we love to learn, we love to learn new things. So it's very easy to go down the rabbit holes. But for me, it's like that is what leads to burnout and dissatisfaction ultimately, because you're not solving or getting to any of the goals you set for yourself when you're constantly pivoting on the path. It's that doggingness about is what we're doing in line with where we're trying to go, and if it's not, what can we let go, or how do we pivot? Which we actually just did a couple of weeks ago, where we retired a KPI because we're like it's too much on top of the other things that are more important. But the work that was done up to that point is helpful to the next thing we need to do. So everybody's still going to get credit for having done it, and it's not wasted. But it's like I'm very okay with saying we don't need to do that right now, and I'm very okay with saying I was wrong. This is way harder or way more work than we thought, and let's move on. And like we don't need to stay stuck on stuff that is a time suck or an energy suck or a money suck.
Yeah, I think that's so important to have that ability to reevaluate and not stand on ceremony and say, I made this decision and it's going to stand. I don't want to lose face or something like that. To be able to just say, you know what? No, we're not doing this anymore.
And that's where I think a lot of businesses do lose credibility, like bigger businesses, where I was thinking about this the other day, because it was always mind-boggling to me that these really large KPIs would be set on number of new built restaurants, right? When you know that if you don't already have all those restaurants in the pipeline to be built, like it's not even possible for it to happen. Every state and every city has different permitting requirements. There's so many things that you don't have control over, but then there would be no budging. And it's like, you actually look weaker when you're not real about the situation than you are if you're just like, mea culpa, I made a mistake. I own it. Let's fix it. Let's move on. And I still don't understand like why people are so resistant to just saying like, yeah, we thought this was going to work, but we should pivot.
It's expediency in some ways. It's like, then I don't have to really look at this issue and dive into it. I can just stand by the shortcut, which says we keep our goals, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's probably other reasons, but I think that's one. So do you feel like you have a spacious life right now?
Yes. Yeah. Because through therapy, trauma certification, where I had to address my own trauma, yoga retreat, it opened up my eyes for me that I cannot be perfect at everything I do. And that was sort of the linchpin of why I didn't always feel like I had a spacious, because I always wanted everything to be perfect. But the way that I talk about it with my team is that we're always going to do great work, but everything doesn't require the same amount of energy. Some clients are not far enough along their path to get our War and Peace decks, right? Because it's not going to speak to them. So why are we going to put 150% into something when it's not what they necessarily need? So it's just being more discerning and not filling every open space, right? So if a meeting is canceled, not filling it. So sometimes it's like, oh, okay, this time was parked for this meeting. It didn't happen. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to sit on the balcony, or I'm going to make some coffee, right? It's just like, it's like regulating the nervous system enough to be able to say that every minute does not have to be. And that's our trauma response, because we live in this grind, country.
So let's pause there. Let's explain a few things to people. So if you don't understand this, there's a concept that says that our traumas from our childhood and other more significant traumas cause us to behave in particular ways that create safety for us, but ultimately in the here and now cause us burnout, stress, overdoing things, all of that. And that's a very big one for high achieving women. We have some sort of trauma from our past that we're chasing. I call it trauma chasing, right? We're chasing this. It's like whack-a-mole, right? Like trying to keep it down and like I can handle. And in some ways, it's part of our success because it usually creates a lot of work ethic, a lot of drive, a lot of ambition, a lot of do. And if it's channeled in the right ways, it can create great outcomes and big successes. But there's a shadow side to it. The shadow side is you get burnt out, you're exhausted, you don't know who you are anymore.
Not sustainable.
It's just not sustainable.
And it's not sustainable because basically, and I love your description, and the only thing I would add is like we hear all the time this idea of fight or flight mode. Oh, you're in fight or flight mode. And that's basically when your nervous system is trying to react to what it perceives as a fear. So it's this, oh, we gotta go, we gotta move, it's urgent, everything's urgent, we gotta go. And I have a chiropractor who does this really cool brain like energy like measures, right? So it's basically like when you get done with it, it's going to show like how fatigued your brain is. And it's like, if you get to see those things over and over and you're like, gosh, I don't want my brain to be so tired, right? And when he's talking about some of the ways you can address it, it's like, okay, but you have to create space. Like you can't always be doing something. You can't always feel like, again, like you have to be filling up your space.
So 100%. I remember when I had to learn, first I had to learn how to maximize my time because I was like going in so many different directions. And then I had to learn how to clear my time, right? Because I was like overstimulated all the time. But one of the things that I want to ask you there is, you know, a lot of women think that if they stop this trauma chasing, right? If they don't go as hard, right? If they're not filling all the time with productive activity, that they will lose their edge. They won't be as successful. They won't be financially successful. They won't get the accolades from their peers for, you know, doing great things in this world. What has your experience been with your downshift or the creating of more space?
Oh, I feel like I'm like a million times more innovative, right? Mm-hmm. Like you are able to connect dots, you know, in terms of like, you know, I talk a lot about like the way I started this business and the first employee I had, it was a grind, right? Like you're doing all these focus groups and interviews and you're just in a lot of information and you just are pushing your work until 12 and 1 and all the time and all of that stuff. And the issue sometimes when you're moving that way and you're working in all the times and not necessarily running the business, because that's sometimes what ends up happening is you're a worker, not a business owner. You also are not able to take account of everything you've been able to do, right? And what now, and why is that important? This happened recently where I was finding myself, I felt I was being boxed in with something I was working on with a client. And it was like, I could feel that we weren't having the same conversation, but my days and weeks had been so packed. I could feel the instinct, but I couldn't put my finger on like what it was that I was like bothered by. And then I sat down. I mean, I gave myself time. Like in the morning, I try to wake up about an hour and a half before I need to get out of the bed because like it gives me time to think and meditate and journal and just it's quiet. There's no one calling me, right? It's just time where it's just quiet. And I was like, wait a minute. How many investigations have we done in the last 5 years? How many employees has our work impacted in the past 5 years? How many assessments have we done? Training, you know, that kind of thing. And then the first thing that comes to mind is like, holy crap, we've done a lot. And what are we doing to highlight the value of that in the proposition of why we are the best consultant for whatever your people issue is? That's one. And two is like, they don't have this knowledge. So we're not having the same conversation because I'm talking to them at the level that their competency or understanding is, and my level of understanding and competency is up here on that particular topic. Yeah. So I needed to bring the topic to my expertise, not the other way around. But when I'm always busy and or I don't have the time, it would have nagged at me. I would have been annoyed. I would have kept saying I was annoyed, but I wouldn't have had the time to really process the why and how to shift the conversation going forward.
That shift then allows you to close more deals, all of that. Okay, great. So I think that's a really beautiful example because a lot of people are afraid that if they slow down, like My phrase that I keep sharing on the podcast is slow is the new fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you just slow down, that doesn't mean not doing things. Okay. It's it's actually more efficient than if you're just busy all the time.
Well, think about it like this. One of the things that showed up for me, and I think this is something you alluded to earlier, was it just saying yes all the time? You want to talk to me? Sure, no problem. We'll fit it in. 7 in the morning, 5 in the morning, 2 in the morning. Okay, no problem, right? And then you're like, if you're thinking about, I have a business coach, and she had asked me something, and it's like, do I want to come across as so available? Do you want to pay for someone top dollar for someone who's available at the moment you call them? No, I mean, it's like, and I'm not actually available because I have 10,000 things going on. Like the first step was saying to my scheduler, I'm going to do a better job at saying this week is done. No more offering of time this week. Like that was the first thing. And now she's been empowered, and she's like, you don't have any time until June. Okay, I believe you, right? Because we've been working through this together. And so I will do my best not to leak time, because sometimes I'm guilty of like, okay, fine, I can talk to you at 5. I mean, it's not completely gone away, but it's significantly different. Or people who won't just sign the retainer that they say they're going to retain you on and keep calling. This happened last week. I'm like, we can't schedule any more calls until we have a signed retainer, right?
Yeah.
You want to work with us or you don't want to work with us. And I just want to put the caveat that some of that takes time. Like if this is your first 6 months of your business, you may not feel like you're ready to be saying no, or right. But if you have had some years under your belt and you have money in the bank, like value yourself enough to say like your client doesn't drop everything always, right? You might take forever to get time with them. Like you're worthy and your time is valuable too. So I think it's that piece. I don't want to sound so like, just do it, because I recognize there's other factors that make it difficult sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that in the beginning, when you're building a business, there's a certain amount of grind that you have to put in. And I wish that I had an example of someone building a tremendously successful business who did it with spaciousness from the get-go. But I don't see that. What tends to happen for people is that they stay too long in that grind when they start getting successful, and they don't pivot fast enough to put some different boundaries on their time, different structures there. And after
recognizing what their role is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, if I'm a CEO of a one-person company, that's different than being a CEO of a 2-person, 3-person, 5-person. And what does that mean? Like for my role, I mean, that was I'm at least once a year looking at my own job description, right? Like 100%. What should I be doing as a CEO of this company?
Do you do time audits for yourself? That's a thing that I've learned to do that I love. I will, whenever I hit like a frustration or irritation level, I'm like, okay, we're going to just see how am I spending my time? And inevitably there's stuff on there that needs to come off my plate. Like that is no longer my role. I probably do that once every 3 to 4 months. It's quite frequent.
Yeah. Oh no, same. I mean, like at least once a year I'm looking at my job description, but I'm regularly asking myself like what my role is in something, so that, for example, now we're at a place where our head of strategy, Shantae Gordon, there's so many things that she works on that I'm like, I don't know. And if it's like, do you want to join the call? Why? To just look crazy? Because I'm not doing you've done it. The clients trust her. She's brilliant. So it's like, but that is my job, right? Is to empower the people that work with me to be able to be out front. Because again, if the business only succeeds because they have to talk to me, then it's not going to be a very successful business.
That's not leveraged. Okay, I want to shift the topic a little bit. Let's talk about the art of the feminine in negotiation. So as a lawyer, you're doing a lot of negotiation. As a business owner, you're negotiating. You're putting in front of people new ideas that you need to help them come on up to speed on and integrate. So would you say that you negotiate in a very traditional masculine way? Do you feel like you have a feminine edge, a feminine side to your negotiations, somewhere in between, all feminine?
So I'm very situational with the negotiation. It's funny that you're asking me this because I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, about how I used to deal with mediations and negotiating settlements. And I was saying to him, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, there's times I would just walk out. And he's like, why? Like, why would you walk out? What does that do? And I'm like, because sometimes you need to send the message that the person on the other side is so unreasonable that I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste my time talking to you when we're in two different universes, right? Like, I don't have to stay here for the whole 4 hours that was allotted. That's that kind of situation. Right. And in that particular situation, it was a plaintiff's lawyer who didn't at all know the facts of his client's case. I was in-house. Our outside lawyer was meticulous. We had a lot more information than him. And notwithstanding all of that, he wanted $750,000. And I'm like, well, if you're being practical, I'm not going to ever come anywhere near that. And so we're not going to waste time. So I've done the walkout option. Most of the time, I'm trying to understand the need of the other side, right? And how does that coincide with the need of my side? And so that, for me, I really try to focus on building rapport so I understand where the other person is coming from and what success looks like for them in this contract negotiation, so that I'm thoughtful of that and how I am. So if you're saying if I'm negotiating an employment agreement for someone and they need da-da-da-da, like, it's okay, so where does that rank for you? Or how does that, so that I can understand, if I can't get 100% of what you want, what are the things that are most important? So when I say it's situational, because my brain just always goes to what is the end goal? Because there's so many different ways to get to that end goal. So I'm never tied to it looking a certain way. It's just being thoughtful about, where are we trying to get with this? And then figuring out the best way to get there. Yeah. So I don't really know what energy that falls in. I will say, I think probably somewhere fall in the middle, because I'm so data oriented that it's just like, how do we be practical here? And there are times you have to send messages depending on who you're talking to, where they don't hear your words, but they maybe see your actions or whatever the case may be. It does require a lot of firm. So I would say, to the extent some feminine energy comes in, I sometimes feel like a little bit like a mother, I am a mother, but bringing that in and saying like, no, I hear you, but we can't do that. Yeah, I hear you. I understand that's what you're looking for. I heard that like when you told me before, but right, like there's that consistency of like, once you're done with like, this is where we are. So like now if someone's trying to negotiate price, I might be as blunt and saying, this costs money. Yeah. So, and so this is what it costs. Yeah. Or I hear you, but maybe we're just not the right people for you, because we can't do that. But it's to stay firm when you've reached the end of your negotiation, you're not willing to go any further. Yeah. It's also just the confidence of staying firm in it.
Fantastic. I love that. Some good phrasing there for people to listen to. The last couple of phrases that you shared. It's like, maybe we're not right for you, And
look, I would never purport to say we're trying to be for everyone. So, depending on your business, that's sometimes part of it. It's okay. Like, it's not a reflection on whether you're good, bad, or whatever.
Okay. So again, shifting to a new topic, let's talk about magic and beauty. Like, one of the things that we talked about when we first met was you'd moved into this new place in Miami and beautiful views, and how important beauty is to you for your surroundings, your environment. And so first, since the audience wasn't privy to that conversation, let's talk a little bit about how important beauty is to you and why you think that I'm putting words in your mouth here, but because of that conversation, why you think that is a worthy place for you to put your energy. Because that was something that I learned early. It was challenging, right? I think I always loved beauty, but I didn't have the financial means to create a beautiful environment until I had the financial means to create a beautiful environment. But that is really important to my well-being, my psychological happiness, to be in a place that I call, everyone has a different definition, but that I call beautiful. It calms my spirit. It centers me. It's good for my nervous system. It's life affirming and sustaining. What does beauty mean to you?
So one, I appreciate you asking that, because I think this is a place where people can actually, there's beauty in making sure you're defining these things for yourself, right? If you are on social media, you will be convinced that you need a new nose, butt, boobs, you're not on enough trips, you didn't write enough ebooks, you didn't get your coaching business with 50 clients in your first 2 weeks. All those things will make you think that you are not achieving beautiful, right? I think for me, beauty always has some tie back to nature, right? I mean, part of the reason why I live somewhere warm is I love to be outside. It's beautiful here.
Let's just put a pause there. So that's a great juxtaposition. The first examples that you gave were all about comparison.
Yes.
Okay. And then you went into beauty to me is nature. They're like, we can't compete at that level. Like that's a totally different plane of demonstration, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of like part of the reason why I ended up here is because I know beauty for me is being able to walk outside at 7 and it's warm still, or look outside and wish I was on somebody's boat and wondering why everybody's on a boat, but I'm not on a boat.
We need to get you on a boat.
Exactly. And so I think that, and I appreciate you even mentioning the financial piece, because a lot of things we convince ourselves we can't be beautiful until we have X dollars or X thing. But I'm looking out at a park in Miami. It's like that walking in that park is free and it's beautiful. And I feel good every time I do it. There's some beautiful tennis courts here. It's like $6 to play tennis. It's not super expensive, but every time, and I was out on the court on Sunday, I was like, I am so excited we did this. It's so beautiful out here. Don't you feel the breeze, right? Like that's for me what's important. Now, of course, as my ability to pay for more things has evolved, like I love to travel, and I love to travel in the ways that are comfortable to me, and which is like lounges, for example, and all those things, because getting out into the world, I love to see things from different perspectives. I think space can be really beautiful. And I think, again, that sometimes it becomes hard because people are like, well, I don't have enough money to, but it's like, find a small corner to focus on. In this new place my son and I moved into, we started all over because everything we'd lived in the old place for so long, some of it was needed to go. And it's been little by little. I became a plant mama, which has been so fun because I never thought I could keep plants alive. And it was just like little by little, okay, what do we think about this? Oh, let's go to the thrift store and look for artwork, and finding some cool, silly $10 painting that everybody's like, what's that? And it's like, isn't that funny? So it's just sort of like this idea of the fluidity and the ability to know that it's my decision on what's beautiful to me. And I don't have to do the thing that someone says I have to. And understanding that like you're the CEO of your life. I think that's been the biggest thing for me in terms of what beauty is and how I need it, right? Yoga is beautiful, and going in, and even on the days I can't do all the stretching, it's just, and I think I would translate beauty in some ways to gratitude, to pause and to say, this is so cool that I am choosing and get to do these things.
Yeah. Life is a gift, right? That we get to live. And yeah, my morning walks are just that, right? They just feel so nourishing. And I'm like, and it's almost like the world looks like it's popping in Technicolor because I'm so like, yay, I'm out. So I love that. I love that. Okay. So before I ask my final questions, where can people find you? If they're interested in your DEI work or just want to say hello, how do they go about finding you?
So we are the Norfus firm, Norfus, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. And then we are What's the Deal? DEIL is our podcast, and that's YouTube, TikTok, also Instagram. So, and I'm Natalie Norfus on LinkedIn. Please reach out. I love chatting with folks. I'm always like, oh, you reached out. Let's find time. So I make the offer, and I think sometimes people don't believe me, but anyone who reaches out, I make time for. So I'd be happy to connect.
That's very cool. But her schedule's not free until June. No, just kidding.
True.
It's true. It's true. Okay. So how would you describe an exquisite life? What does an exquisite life mean to you?
So space to work on projects that you feel passionate about, even if they're not to a particular goal. My son said at some point that really resonated to me, like everything doesn't have to be monetized. So I think if you look at the luxury of being able to start buying plants, right? Getting into plants, like that doesn't, I mean, that's just something I'm interested in. So making sure you have space to play, as Shantae often says, like we need space, like we still have that childlike aspect. So I think space is one. Nourishing relationships, so which get evaluated regularly, people who can see you, people you can be vulnerable with, travel with, have fun with. An exquisite life is seeing more than my perspective, right? So going to different countries, different restaurants, different places is always going to be part of that. And then I think the last piece is continuously practicing being open to love and giving love.
That last one is the ticket right there. That's like, I feel like when we are in that place, when we are open-hearted and the love is flowing, we are tapped into something that is so much greater than our human 3D experience. And it really is like the unlock to mastering life, having an exquisite life. So I'm with you on that. Where do you feel like where's there a gap in your vision of an exquisite life and where you are now?
I would say maybe just some of the non-work relationships, It's funny. I mean, I just recently decided to start putting effort into dating again because I was like, well, maybe we could work on that, So I think some of those types of relationships, because as much as people say you can have it all, there are times where you have to put energy towards certain things more than others. And so, being a mother has really it's been just as important and oftentimes way more important than my business or whatever I'm working on. And so having a new business, being a mom, a single mom, there's a point where you're like, okay, there's only so many moments in the day. But I think being able to create space in other places, they're like, okay, I'm ready to create space in that place.
I love that. Well, we should talk because that is something that I know how to create. I'm all about manifesting exquisite love. So with that, I just want to say, Natalie, thank you so much for your generosity, for your ability to sort of put these concepts into well-articulated form, for really sharing your journey and how you've showed up and the changes that you've consciously made, and sometimes ahead of the game and sometimes in reaction, but what it takes to really build a successful business in life. So thank you so much for being here, Natalie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It was a great conversation.
And thank you all for listening to the Unstoppable Woman podcast. If you liked this episode, please give it a like. Please share it. Please give us a review on iTunes or Spotify, all the places. It all helps us to get more visibility to these kinds of conversations where women are really sharing what it takes to be successful and have their ambition match their drive for an exquisite life as well. So we are grateful for anything you do in that vein. And if you wish to comment on this podcast, I would love to hear what your ahas were, what you took away, what made you think deeper about particular subjects, and what might you do differently as a response to listening to this podcast. I read all the comments, so please go ahead and leave a comment, and I'll catch you in the next episode. I'm Amira Alvarez. I'm the founder and CEO of The Unstoppable Woman. Live exquisitely, and until next time, bye.